All right. Well, welcome everyone. On behalf of the organizing committee and executive of the Association of Canadian College and University Ombudspeople, I am Jennifer Meister, and I am thrilled to welcome you to Ombuds 101, an introduction to ACCUO and the Ombuds world. Hello, everybody. So our plan today, looking at the registrations, was that we would have not only individuals from across Canada, but also Australia, Mexico, Turkey, Luxembourg, and the United States. So if you are from those, I've been trying to keep an eye on people. If you are from outside of Canada, welcome. Before I turn it over to ACCUO's president, Natalie Sharpe, to talk a bit about the association, I would like to acknowledge the traditional territories that we are all participating from. In preparing this land acknowledgement, and in the spirit of ombudsing, I have investigated the various traditional lands from which we are all participating today. From the United States, I am honored that we have a participant from the traditional lands of the Muskogee Creek Indians. From Australia, I welcome participants from land traditionally owned by the Whadjuk Noongar people of Western Australia, and pay respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. From Canada, I acknowledge the many lands on which our institutions are located. From west to east, the traditional territory of the Songhees and Esquimalt peoples, the traditional Coast Salish lands, the Treaty 6 traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people, the Dish with One Spoon territory and the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenampawak nations, the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, and the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq peoples. Our lands continue to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our academic institutions and society. It is now my pleasure to introduce you all to Natalie Sharpe, longtime director of the Office of the Student Ombuds at the University of Alberta and president of ACCUO. Natalie is going to provide an introduction to ACCUO, its mission, resources, future plans, opportunities, and very importantly, ACCUO's connection to the International Ombuds Network.
Thank you, Jennifer. Do we have the
yes. Just give me a minute to switch slides. Stay with me, everybody.
And welcome, everyone. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that land acknowledgement. Okay, so this is just getting to know about ACCUO, AUC, and if you can go to the next slide, please. So I've just noted our mandate and tried to keep this brief by explaining first that we're bilingual and independent, and our role is dedicated to promoting and fostering an understanding appreciation of our role within universities, colleges, and technical institutes within Canada. We also support our members through networking, education, and professional development opportunities, such as we are offering today. And we are linked to international networks of higher education ombuds to promote the growth, support, and protection of the higher education ombuds role. Next slide, please. So why did higher education ombuds appear in Canada and elsewhere? The primary influence, I believe, is the civil and human rights movements of the 60s. And there I've listed all kinds of equity-seeking groups such as women's rights, LGBTQ, Aboriginal, and there were anti-Vietnam War protests, the disability rights, and also throughout the 60s, there were Students for a Democratic Society under various names. Under student initiative, Simon Fraser Students' Union created the very first ombuds in Canada in 1965, and apparently for North America. We had many events within our campuses of unrest, such as a computer riot at Sir George Williams University in 1969, when 400 students protested against racist treatment of Black students. We also had the ACCUO crisis during the Quiet Revolution in Quebec, and various commissions on the status of women and the Charter of Human Rights and of Freedoms. And we also saw in the 70s an appearance of provincial ombuds in many of the Canadian provinces. Next slide. And so the first Canadian higher education ombuds, as we noted, was the Simon Fraser University Students' Union ombuds. And this was years before the provincial ombuds appeared. And so there've been informal networks of American and Canadian higher education ombuds since the mid-70s. And we did not become a formal organization until 1983. The highest growth that we saw was in the 90s, followed by steady growth since 2010. And a key piece of information, it's on our website, is Martine Conway's ACCUO 3 Decades of Ombuds in Higher Education. So it shows the historical survey of the growth of higher ed ombuds in Canada and internationally. You can see all the links to our other organizations. Today, our demographics are sitting at 67 members representing 39 post-secondary institutes. You can see about 3/4 are university, and the other quarter are either college, cégeps, and technical institutes. 2/3 serving students, and the other third includes faculty and staff as well. 3/4 have terms of reference and also publish reports, and 1/3 have existed for more than a decade. The membership of member offices, I should say, range from 1 to 6 ombuds, and the university that I'm from has an ongoing internship program. When you look, you'll see that there are institutional memberships for more than 2 members, and we have at least 4 of those with 3 to 6 ombuds, but they only have 1 vote. Then what we have is a voting member, and we have many, and a few associate members, and there the rates are listed below, and these have been there for a while. I don't know if they'll vary a bit more, but their membership renewal is on July the 1st. So I'm currently the president. I'm in my 3rd term of 2 years, and it was unusual. Usually there's no more than 2 terms, but because of the pandemic, I stayed on. And Emma is the new secretary. Alexia Wright is our treasurer, and Emma Thacker is, by the way, from U of Toronto. And members include Julie Boncompin, Annette O'Hara, Jennifer Meister, who's hosting today. And you can see that members on the executive are across Canada. So this includes for members, 3 members or the past president, and 2 members. And you can see that we hold 2-year terms elected at the AGM. And there's a big note there that there is a president vacancy at this coming AGM, which is May, is it 18th that we've just selected? I've just forgotten the date. And we also need an elections officer. Next slide. So what kinds of committees do we have? We have communications, and our lead is Rob Thompson, International Relations Committee, and there the chair is Julie Boncompin. The Awards Committee, chaired by George Cole, and an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, co-chaired by Annette O'Hara and Lavon Hood. We also have a new International Book Club, and we're proposing a professional development committee. And we do have special committees from time to time, such as constitutional review. We also have regional meetings, strategic planning committee, and a conference planning committee for today. So what do we do for our members? We're definitely the central source of information for current and also anyone who's interested in setting up an ombuds office. We promote confidential discussions around cases and institutional policies on our ACCUO listserv for the voting members and institutional members, including we also have legal decisions in higher education in English and French. We have the ACCUO bulletin that we try to get out every 2 months, announcing new departing members, upcoming events, webinars, and training through the form of Canadian Ombuds and Osgood Professional Ombuds certificates, ongoing conferences, etc. We represent the professional interests of our members. And again, we also provide support and professional development for all. As higher education is under provincial jurisdiction, our institutions are independent, and that is why ACCUO is so important in tying us together to promote our growth and protection of higher education offices. Many of us are one-person offices who work at arm's length in the institution, so that's another important reason for our ongoing collegial support and mentoring. And some important resources, if you've gone on your website, you'll note there's the Constitution. We adopted standards of practice at our last in-person AGM 2012 that was hosted at the University of Alberta. And there the standards of independence, impartiality, confidentiality, and accessibility are there to guide us in our practices. The survey of the growth of higher education ombuds in Canada internationally, that's one by Martine Conway. We've also got a toolbox that shows you how to create an ombuds office, the rationale for it, including terms of reference with a clause template for mandate. Also, 2 fairness guides, because fairness is at the heart of Canadian ombuds. We have a fairness guide and fairness in communication. You will also see announcements how to announce for member recognition awards. And you will also see our various members' websites, the provincial government websites, the Forum of Canadian Ombuds, and the International Ombuds Institute website. What is very important recently is that we now have statements from our organization on Black Lives Matter and National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Next slide. So we are growing our international colleagues, and you will see also on our website the link to international colleagues. What is very important is in 2019, the Leon Declaration, International Collaboration between Ombuds networks in higher education, was signed to promote international exchange. And this includes signatories from the European Network of Ombuds, in higher education, the Spanish network ACCUO, Portuguese network Euredipes, and Latin American network Redo, including our Canadian organization. We have close ties also with the Australian University Grievance and Complaints Network, and any member can gain access to their webinars or their querulous quarterly newsletter. We are closely connected with the California Caucus of University and College Ombuds. Some of us attend the conferences. They had a webinar last year, and they have an ongoing journal. And I'm currently sitting on the conference planning committee. The International Ombuds Association is a very large organization in the States with training, conferences, and a journal. We often can look to Tom Kozakowski's Ombuds blog for job posting and events. And more recently, some of us have been attending the African Ombuds Research Center webinars. Not the greatest timing because it's in the middle of the night, especially if you're in Western Canada, but they're excellent and they're every 2 or 3 months. So how can you be involved as a member? First of all, attending webinars such as the wonderful EDI webinar that we held in December, and that was really well attended. Lots of informal networking, and we've had lots of regional meetings. Or you could propose and facilitate a webinar, joining special projects such as the International Book Club or our conference planning committee. Any of our committees, and we noted the various committees just before, and the proposed professional development. The executive could start as being one of the regional reps, or volunteering as the AGM elections officer, contributing an article to the ACCUO bulletin, and any short-term help such as occasional translations. And I forgot to include helping with the website, and anyone who's interested in the history of ACCUO or archiving, we need you. So future plans are that we're undergoing strategic planning over the next year. Again, we're hoping for more educational webinars for our members, the EDI training based on our EDI survey and report. We're hoping for certificates for training, starting with Ombuds 101, which we're doing today. We want to restore our annual conferences, starting with a virtual conference and strengthening our regional networks. And again, of course, providing you new PD opportunities and exploring the co-hosting of conferences with Ombuds networks and strengthening our modes of communication with members. We haven't told you all the places we've tried to reach every institution across Canada to promote the growth of higher education ombuds, and of course, creating alliances to help grow these offices. So next, and these are the sources that this presentation has come from. So have a good day.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I greatly appreciate that overview of ACCUO. And just a little aside, I have been a member for 11 years and I've gone to most of the conferences. And I have to tell you, one of the most valuable things I get out of ACCUO is that connection with other ombuds. So I'm very fortunate that there are two people in our office that I can talk about problems with, share ideas. But when I do have a question, I don't hesitate to call up Carolyn from McMaster or Natalie or Shirley from UBC and say, oh boy, this is going on. What do you think? What do you suggest? So that's, it really, we're small but mighty.
Yeah.
Anyway, I am now going to turn things over to Carolyn Brendon. Carolyn is the Ombudsperson at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. And Carolyn has been at McMaster a long time and does some wonderful work there with the students. So Carolyn, I'll turn it over.
Oh, thank you very much, Jennifer. So I have been asked to host this session of the program called Big Questions. And so in this session, we have three panelists, Soucila, Badaroudine, who is the retired Ombuds from Sherbrooke University, Martine Conway, who is the Ombudsperson at the University of Ottawa, and Rob Thompson, who is the Ombudsperson at Camosun College. So I will begin by asking our panelists a few questions about the experiences that have shaped them and the wisdom that they have gathered through their careers. And then it will be your turn to ask the panelists the questions that you have been wondering about. So I will start with the first question for our panelists. So much of the Ombuds role involves handling cases that come into our offices and using our knowledge and best. I'm going to ask each of you to tell us about a case that you have been involved in that has stayed with you and the lessons that you have carried with you from that experience. So I will start with Soucila.
Alors, est-ce que je lève la main pour commencer?
So very well, I will start now. I will start with perhaps I was ombudsman during 16 years at the University of Sherbrooke, and I'm a young retiree. So about 15 years ago, I can talk about maybe my biggest mistake, and I can speak about it with humility now, I think. So very humbly, I can say that my biggest mistake was a situation, quite special case actually. It was a situation where we had an international student there was a war in his country. It was the end of his program, and his loan and bursary was ending. He had mental problems, and he could not go back into his country. In this context, the student became very insistent, was knocking at every door, presenting always an attitude of restrained violence and paranoid behaviors. The head of the faculty and the university did not know how to go about this case, and the student did not want to see a psychologist. He claimed he had read, so he was referred to the ombudsman, last recourse. In my office, I was just starting. I had no safety protocol, no safety plan for such a situation in that university. There was none at the time anyway, and there was no crisis cell. So I had to support this situation on my own for about 6 months. We finally found a humanitarian solution for that student, but I had to stop and go for a leave after a diagnosis of post-traumatic shock. So what I retained from this situation is that we have to recognize one's own limits. We must generate collaboration from partners. We must be in support. We must give support instead of doing things in their place. We should give back to the authorities their responsibility. So that is what I have learned from that situation.
Oh, thank you very much, Soucila. And then we will move to Martine from University of Ottawa. Martine, can you tell us about a case that you've been involved in, that you've learned from?
Sure, and like Soucila, I have chosen one that was earlier in my long role as an ombudsman, and that was also an error. And it happened to be a complaint about a process inside a student group, but it could equally have been a university process. The mandate was quite wide in the office because the ombudsman could be the first place you go to for information, the last place for an investigation, and everything in between. And the process was a process for granting an award, and people had complained about the process and were questioning the awardee as well, the decision itself. And in my, I don't know, eagerness to do well and to fulfill my mandate, I guess, I kind of ran, not too badly, but with this idea that this was an investigation. And luckily, I called my colleague who was in the human rights office at the time, because I knew that she had interacted with that group, and she had experience doing human rights investigations. And as a new ombuds, I actually was trained as a mediator, didn't have any experience investigating as such, had some ideas about how to go about it. And as I was talking about, how do you go about looking into and how do you present findings? She suddenly said, but you're not gonna present findings, are you? This is not an investigation. And so that got me to think, and then to rethink exactly what I was doing, what was the purpose of my looking into it after the decision was made anyway. And I reframed my intervention into something that was more talking to the different elements within the group in terms of what had worked and what had not worked in the process and what they would like to see happen differently in the future. So it became more of a facilitation. And so what I got out of it, I suppose that I could take away was, I have to be very careful that I keep control of the process that I am, the Ombuds process that I am a student of, that I choose the mode of intervention, and also that I communicate that to the people that are coming to me. Luckily, because I had the good idea to check with my colleague, I changed directions relatively quickly, so there was it wasn't awkward. But it's really important, and now it's really part of my process at the University of Ottawa. I've only been here 3 years. I was at music before. I also have this whole range of tools for information, advice, informal intervention, investigation. So one of the first things we do is we frame our role. We have a kind of a flow chart that shows the different things we do, but we let people know where they are, particularly when it's important. We let them know exactly where they are on that flow chart. So that's helpful. That's helpful to you. Another thing that actually I took away without realizing, and it was echoed recently in a workshop I was in. It was worded like this by the ombudsman from the city of Montreal. We deal with the need, not the want. So I thought that was a useful way to think about it as well.
That's great. Thank you very much. And then we'll move to Rob. If you can share a case that you've been involved with.
Thanks, Carolyn. Great to see everyone. I was the ombudsperson at Lakehead University before I've come to Camosun College. And I just want to share a simple example of a successful intervention into a glitch and a lazy staff person, which is a classic ombuds combination, isn't it? So it's not very dramatic or sexy, but it might contribute in a small way to this perennial ombuds question of reactive versus proactive and when and how to intervene. A student visited my office showing me several months of very patient and respectful email communication between him and the university financial aid staff. The student loan had still not arrived 2 months into the semester. You can imagine how he was feeling. In Ontario, when there's a problem or an appeal with OSAP, that's the Provincial Student Financial Aid Office, a student cannot contact OSAP directly. They have to contact their college or university financial aid office, which then contacts the provincial office. So this student was stuck with this staff person and respectfully continued to ask him to look into it. Surely there must be a problem. Each time the staff person said, please wait, be patient, no explanation. The student tried again every week or two, but this response was always the same. So he was blocked. He couldn't get beyond the staff person. And by this time he was running out of money and getting quite desperate. So what to do? He came to my office. So of course, standard process, I could direct the student to the supervisor, who in this case is the associate registrar. That would be fine guidance, that would be normal. Or I could call the associate registrar myself, maybe better. But I know that she's extremely busy and it would probably take a good few days to be able to get an appointment with her. So I thought, the student had waited long enough and the issue I thought could be resolved quickly with a simple and personal intervention. So I walked with the student to the financial aid office where we waited for the financial aid staff person he'd been communicating with. I introduced myself and the student. And of course, I wanted to criticize the staff person for not looking into the matter, but of course I didn't. I said very little. I simply explaining that I had seen his email communication with the student over numerous weeks about the loan, and I wonder if now he would mind looking into it. He agreed. I said we would wait. He called the provincial student loan office, and lo and behold, I think you know the answer. They discovered a simple error in the student's application. Not the student's fault, but it was when it had been processed and put into the provincial system. The issue was resolved quickly with the provincial office, and the loan could be released to the university, and the student received the money, I think several days later. So what I took from it was you can sometimes see that a bureaucratic error or glitch has been allowed to continue for too long. Instead of simply explaining the process to the student, which is our job, could be that a very gentle or proactive intervention with the staff could dislodge the glitch immediately, saving the student from further red tape and further waiting and suffering. So in this case, the intervention was simply accompanying the student in person. I learned really well when working with an international human rights organization in Asia, works in conflict zones, that personal accompaniment can wordlessly change the power dynamic with a lazy, reluctant, maybe mean or violent staff. And as an ombuds, I've used this accompaniment approach at other times with success. And as it turns out, if there's no glitch, it's no problem. It's still a win because the student will learn more fully about the process and may grasp it better with me there with them. As a follow-up, I witnessed his staff wait and be patient communication again with another student. So later, when I was meeting with the registrar on another topic, I mentioned it using no names. She agreed it was unacceptable behavior and promised to speak with the entire financial aid office staff, her staff, as part of their regular training. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rob. Yeah, I think all three stories are great because they highlight different things, and it just shows the sort of range of tools that we need in our toolbox, and how much judgment we have to bring to these cases to determine what is an appropriate and effective way to resolve issues. So thank you very much. So the next question is, as when we were new ombuds, we all found mentors or experienced ombuds to help us be successful in this role. So tell us about the best advice that you ever received that has served you well throughout your career. So I will, maybe I'll mix up the order this time. Maybe I'll start with Martine.
Je vais répondre en français.
I will answer in French to that question. So the question is the best advice that we have received from a mentor. Well, one of the things that I've been told very quickly, well, two things actually. One of the two things was to demonstrate the added value given by the ombudsperson to the organization and to everyone within that organization. So to have strategies to do that in the communications and alliances. But I wanted to link that, this question, with a question that we had also before the workshop. Somebody was saying, how do we make recommendations right now in this COVID period where everyone making decisions are so busy with so many things and things changing all the time? So I don't have an ideal answer to that, because indeed it is very difficult to make recommendations that may be used in the future. But one of the things I've been told regarding strategy was write your or frame your priorities within the priorities set out by the university itself. For example, the strategic plan of the universities or the values promoted by the certain programs. Or, for example, right now, questions linked to inclusion, for example, or mental health, for example. So I've had a good experience yesterday or the day before, I'm not too sure. I was presenting my yearly report to the governor's bureau, as it is called at the University of Ottawa. Just before me, there was the progress report on the activities on mental health. And without me making links, but somebody made the link for me as regards the work of the ombudsperson and this idea that a campus with accessible services. Well, all this will help the mental health as a whole. So every time we can make links like that, well, I think it's good. It's one of the things that I've tried to use in a strategic manner in my work.
Thank you so much, Martine. So I'll go to Soucila now. Soucila, can you tell us about some advice that you've received that served you well?
Oui, bien sûr.
Yes, of course. And as I was hearing my colleagues, it gives me an idea that the ombudsperson is really an equilibrist. The best advice that I have received deals with diplomacy, art and manner, as I would state it. So I'm using the words of Nadine Mayou, the chair of Canadian Forum of Ombudspersons, regarding the role. She described it so well that I think it could be interesting. So what she says is that, in fact, the ombudsperson must create links based on trust without being too close, collaborate with no complacency, recall people to order, but without blaming, make people accountable without personalizing, being there always, but without being too harsh, reconciliating without being too involved, make public but with humility, and finally create a feeling of justice, educate, create awareness, and talk about equity and all its components. I think all these are great advices, and we learn that we learn to apply this in our daily practice, and we acquire this through experience. So I wanted to share it with you.
Thank you so much, Soucila. And Rob, would you like to share with us some of the advice you might have received from a mentor along the way?
Yeah, great. I actually received some good advice from some ACCUO members when I first started, and one excellent piece of advice was to be very careful about getting involved with student association conflicts. I think this will resonate with some people. And it was good that I asked, because I was sort of about to get involved, and so we'll likely, or almost assuredly, observe poor behavior and poor process with student association staff and elected student members. Students will complain to us about it. That's fine. We can direct complainants to the appropriate student association office. But otherwise, beware, as it is a completely separate organization. And we need to explain this to students when they complain to us about it. And it can be very painful for us to witness, because we feel bad about it. And I certainly had that experience at Lakehead University. Depending on the leadership, students associations can range from well-organized, caring, and supportive to self-serving, incompetent, sometimes fraudulent. Fortunately, where I now work at Camosun College, the student association is very well run, and they actually encourage feedback from my office. But that's I think not the norm. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great example, Rob. So I think we've heard about from Martine about aligning the mission of the Ombuds with the mission of the university where there's overlap, and from Soucila about the importance of diplomacy, and from Rob about thinking about the relationship with the student union as a separate entity from the university and what that might involve. So those are all really good examples. So my last question for you then is, in addition to these mentors and advice that you've received, many of us have looked for professional development training and other resources to help us improve our knowledge and skills when doing our jobs. So tell us about a resource or educational opportunity that you have found particularly helpful in developing your skills. So Rob, I'll start with you this time.
Okay, I've got a few. They're super quick. I took a mediation certificate training. It took several years. That's been really useful. I did it before I actually became Ombudsperson. And it's not that I'm mediating all the time. Occasionally I do a formal mediation, but the skills from the mediation certificate have been very useful. And coaching also, coaching training. As it turns out, we do a lot of coaching, especially with students, and which I hadn't predicted how much coaching we do. So there's lots of coaching courses and training, also certificates, which would really help us. Sharpening your teeth, the Ontario Ombuds investigation training, sharpening your teeth. That's the name of it. It's really well done. I can't remember. It's either 2 or 3 days, usually in Toronto. Very useful for us. And then finally, my discussions with a number of you when I've had a dilemma or a very complicated situation and I've called. It's been really helpful for me to talk for a half an hour or an hour. And to those of you who I've called with a tough situation, I really appreciate your time in talking me through or just brainstorming together options. So thank you.
That's great, Rob. And Martine, we'll go to you next.
Okay, so well, I came from a place of mediation as well. So the first thing is in terms of formal training, I was looking for the things that were missing in my set of tools. So for example, principles of administrative justice or getting a grounding in human rights issues was a priority for me at the beginning to get that grounding. Like Rob, what I find the most useful is the conversations with colleagues. So in particular, the informal kind of roundtable types of things, like which we're trying to emulate a little bit today, and Eastern and Western geographical meetings where a few of us really just talking about cases. And when I was in the West, we used to do these across sectors of ombuds practice. So one thing, for example, is to really look at what others that are not in necessarily our sector are doing that we might adapt. So Rob just mentioned the investigation training from Ombudsman Ontario, which I took, I also found very, very useful. But we don't do investigations every day either. But there's so many things that you can adapt. And one of the things was from the BC Ombudsman, one suggestion that they made to us is, you're not going to do systemic investigations. You don't necessarily have the staff to do a big investigation or et cetera, but you might do best practice reports. So it doesn't have the more confrontational aspect of a big investigation, but it can generate from, we still have to identify people that could generate useful information, but sometimes from the sector, from for example, academic or administrative unit themselves, what they see as best practice in their own, and then reinforce those messages. So it was interesting how they even were trying to think about how can you in the academic sector, where sometimes you're just one of you, you can then make use of these training that sometimes look like something big that I would never get to do, like a big investigation.
Oh, sorry. So Soucila, we're going to you next. So do you have some training or mentoring that you would recommend? I can't hear you, Soucila. I think you're on mute.
Soucila, on ne t'entend pas. Ok.
Ah, voilà, merci.
There we are. I managed to do it. So on top of the training sessions, what I find useful, the discussion forum, the listserv, is a community of practices, is a very good tool in our daily lives. So you can ask questions, exchange on good practices, validate sometimes some ideas, and inspire yourself on what is being done elsewhere. So for me, it is a great opportunity to take advantage of the experiences throughout the country and to help each other. So listserv is a very useful tool, and do not hesitate, use it when you need it. And also, I think we have to recognize the generosity of people asking questions, but also those who take the time to answer them. It is very enriching.
That's great, Soucila. Thank you so much. So we have about 10 minutes left, and the panel has offered to answer questions. So it would help if you would either raise your hand or even your and then we can ask the panelists to respond. So feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Okay. Oh, there we go. Cindy, would you like to ask a question?
Sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate everything everybody had to share. This is about training, and I've been in the associate ombuds role at UBC Okanagan for 3 years. I've managed to do the Essentials for Ombuds training at Osgoode Law School through York University. And I'm looking and just thinking about what Rob was saying with regard to mediation and conflict resolution and coaching specifically. I'm looking to work toward a certificate, and I've been looking at the conflict resolution, but I'm wondering if you would find it more valuable to lean toward the mediation certificate instead. Maybe you could give me some input on that.
Rob, do you want to start with that question, and then we'll move to the others?
Yeah, good question. I also I have a master's in conflict resolution, so it's hard for me to unravel which the master's in conflict resolution definitely supports my work, but it was much more big picture and more theory, and the mediation certificate is very practical and really down to earth. This is how to run a mediation session successfully. So they're quite different, but both very helpful.
And Soucila, did you want to add to that?
Moi, je dirais que...
Well, I would say that mediation, the principles of mediation are very important and very interesting. But I find it difficult to see how we can apply pure mediation in our work, because we do more conciliation, we're more involved in other such things, because at the end we must take a position, while a mediator does not take a position, will only facilitate a problem resolution process. So for me, the principles are important, but I think we have to keep in mind how we position ourselves as ombudsperson.
Thank you. Martine?
Je suis d'accord avec Soucila, c'est-à-dire...
I totally agree with Soucila. I had a training on the spot in mediation. I got that in the 90s as a volunteer in a mediation center, and I use these tools all the time. They're very useful to facilitate communication, etc. And we have to keep the mediation process, keeping in mind we're ombudsman, ombudsperson, and we must keep in mind questions of justice, etc.
Thank you very much. That gives me a great idea. I can see the value and the practicality of the mediation, but I wondered about the frequency of application and really the intent within the Ombuds office, and that maybe it is more along the lines of just advocating for fairness than specifically mediating and engaging in those discussions between the two parties. So super helpful. Thank you.
Great. So is there another question? We have about 7 or 8 minutes left, so lots of time if someone has another question. I'll just put it back to, oh, sorry, Maureen.
Hi, yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm relatively new to the Ombudsperson role. I'm at Ryerson University and I started on January 18th. So it's a new experience for me. So I really appreciate this session. Thank you very much. It's very helpful. One of the things that I'm finding just from the get-go is what sort of relationship do you have with your respective institutions' legal group? Because I have, been at the university for a nanosecond, and there are my background is I'm a lawyer with 25 years experience, 15 in admin law, and I see various policies, particularly ones dealing with vaccine mandates and that sort of thing. Then there's a timeliness issue with respect to when students can drop a course and get a full refund. So in terms of trying to understand how certain policies are being applied and if there's a fairness issue, what sort of limitations are there, if any, that you think I should be aware of when interacting with legal counsel?
Who would like to start that one?
I know it's a pretty deep question. I apologize.
It's a great question. Martine?
I could start with something. The first thing is when I got to University of Ottawa after being many years at UVic, I was thinking, okay, I'm in a new campus. I need to make new relationships. So the first thing is I think it is important to have a conversation with the legal office to remind them about the role of your office, and but to distance your office, obviously, also. And I don't know, but in terms of actual cases, I don't tend to deal with the legal office. One thing that I need, the people who deal with legal stuff, and in particular, access to information for the university, is the distance between them and my office. And in my case, for example, the university has accepted that the files of the Ombudsperson are not subject to the freedom of information inquiries that can go through those legal channels. So those kinds of high-level discussions. And then in terms of application of policy, it tends to be more with the administrators. I mean, sometimes, obviously, I have some input before. It doesn't always happen, but as a policy is being developed, I didn't have any input as the policies were being developed about the mandates or any of those. But with other policies where it takes more time, it's over more time, there are opportunities for ombuds to comment on early drafts or to comment on application if in raising issue, tends to be more with the administrators than the legal team. I don't know what my colleagues have to add to that.
Yeah. Soucila, did you want to add to that?
Oui, moi aussi.
I too have always kept a great distance with the legal group of the university, but I should talk in the past. Now I'm not ombudsman anymore, but the files were very confidential, and we would not share that or these situations or the content with anyone. I understand that the question is more refers more to policies or regulations. There too, as regards the policies and regulations, it's more the high administration of the university that will deal with that. But what I have found where the role of the ombudsperson is important is to be able to give an advice when requested, of course. When requested, it's important to be able to give a good advice on the policies or the regulations to make sure that they respect the equity rules for students. And there we can do a very constructive work with university administration. So that's more that kind of work, that kind of relationship that I think should be emphasized.
Thank you, Soucila. And Rob?
Yeah, quite similarly, because my office has a very good relationship with the college. They often invite the office to give feedback on draft policies, and occasionally it has involved the universities or the college's lawyer. Usually it's with the administration, but occasionally the lawyer, the university lawyer, has requested feedback on it. And I think this comes from spending a lot of work in creating these really positive relationships so that they would request the feedback.
Thank you, Rob. I'm not on the panel, but I'll just add to that. I think one of the ways I look at it is that we're not necessarily giving advice about a legal matter, right? We're giving advice about best practice and what we think is fair. So we may not necessarily line up with legal in terms of how we're viewing a certain matter. So that was the only thing I wanted to add, but I agree with the other comments.
Great. Thank you very much. That's helpful.
So with that, I think we're out of time, Jennifer, so I'm going to pass it over to you. So thank you very much, panelists, and everyone for attending.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, and everybody on the panel. I have written down, we deal with the need, not the want, which Martine said. And I think I've heard Martine say that before, but I've written it down and I'm going to do something with it. I'm not sure, maybe make a big sign in front over my desk. We deal with the need, not the want. Anyway, we did have a question. There's a little bit of talk going on in the chat regarding other organizations that we belong to and whether or not as ACCUO members, we can get access to some of the other resources. My understanding, and Natalie can jump in, but my understanding is no, you have to be members of those organizations. Although, Natalie, you did mention the Australian group. I and Whitney Barrett, who is our Associate Ombudsperson at Western, are both members of IOA. And I can tell you that they really grasped COVID and used it to their benefit. And they have so many great online workshops and sessions and things like that. FCO also, which is the Forum of Canadian Ombudspeople, also has those great coffee chats roughly once a month, which somebody mentioned. I'm signed up for this month's, which is about, difficult customers. So Natalie, do you want to jump in? Is there anything else regarding that?
So anything that's sort of an informal network or caucus, you can join in. So the Australian group, definitely. I'm trying to think of what time it would be in the East, probably around 5 or so, because it's around 7 p.m. my time when they have theirs. And they're about 3 times a year. The African network, I've just sent a note in that I want to join it, and so far that's been absolutely free. But it's broader issues, and it includes a lot of human rights ombuds. They have big connections with IOA and the International Ombuds Institute. The other one that you can get involved in is CalCaucus. So it's again a caucus, and they had their first virtual summer webinar that was free. They might charge a nominal fee in the future, but they actually had an on-site conference this year.
Thank you, Natalie, very much. So I think what we'll do now is take a break until 2:10 in the east. So 1:12, 11:10 in BC. Let's see, 12:10 in Edmonton. My math is just bang on today. And I see we also have somebody here from Dalhousie. So I guess 3:10. Anyway, we'll take a little bit of a break and welcome you back for the more social networking part of the event.